12 Years a Slave versus Beloved, a presentation by Madeline Robertson. Overview of 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. 12 Years a Slave is a nonfiction text written and narrated by Solomon Northup. It follows the story of Northup's kidnapping and being forcefully sold into the slave trade, despite being born a free man. Not only does his story go into depth in regards to the treatment of slaves, it also talks about his thoughts and feelings during the 12-year ordeal. I am Solomon Northup. I am a free man, a resident of Saratoga, New York. The residents also of my wife and children who are equally free. I have papers. You have no right whatsoever to detain me. Overview of Beloved by Toni Morrison. Beloved follows the life of a slave, Seth, and her escape from slavery. It also focuses on her life after slavery. Seth is unsure of how to cope with life after slavery, and she still finds herself clinging on to the past, despite being a free woman. Although this story is different from 12 Years a Slave, both characters face similar treatment, and they struggle to identify as anything other than a slave. Past traumas both prevent the characters from being able to understand freedom in its entirety. Theme: Beloved and 12 Years a Slave both explore the impact slavery has on their characters, along with including notions of freedom to motivate them throughout their suffering. Why I chose this theme. 12 Years a Slave and Beloved both follow a story of a person being forced into slavery. It talks about the mistreatment they experienced at the hands of their slave masters and the lack of resources they had in order to help them. Both stories discuss their characters' thoughts and feelings throughout the ordeal and how they managed to cope throughout it all. Therefore, it seemed important to acknowledge how similar the stories were, especially because it was based within the same time era. Although they did not have the exact same experience, it was still comparable to say the least. Connections to 12 Years a Slave. Thus far, the history of my life presents nothing whatever unusual, nothing but the common hopes and loves and labors of an obscure colored man, making his humble progress in the world. Northup, page 11. This quote was spoken by Solomon Northup, where he is narrating his life as an African American living in the United States, before he was kidnapped and sold into slavery. Although he was born a free man, he still faced discrimination and hatred from other people, especially white people. It describes the emotions he held while he was still a free man, which greatly contrasts his feelings after his entrapment. He also describes himself as normal as possible, no matter how grim his situation may have been initially. Northup does this in order for the readers to be able to relate to him. Connection to Beloved. Freeing yourself was one thing. Claiming ownership of that freed self was another. Morrison, page 111 to page 112. This quote was said by Seth, where she recalls the freedom she obtained for 28 days after arriving at 124. Although this newfound freedom was amazing, she still could not feel truly at ease, due to the fact that she was always on edge while being a slave. This was a difficult process for her because she, among other people living there, found it hard to truly feel free after so many years of abuse and mistreatment. Seth found it difficult to be herself, which was an effect that the slavery had on her. It stripped her of her personality and knowing how to be free. Second connection to 12 Years a Slave. What'll Become of Me? Northup, page 207. This quote is said by Patsy when Northup is freed from slavery and is being escorted out of the plantation. She is terrified for her own life and what will happen to her when Solomon leaves. Patsy suffered sexual and physical abuse at the hands of their slave master, Edwin Epps. Solomon attempted to protect her on a number of occasions. Slavery has made Patsy fear for her own life, and it makes her wonder if anything is ever really going to change for her. Slavery causes one's future to be uncertain and not looked at in a positive manner, which is exactly what happens to Patsy when she asks Solomon that question. Second connection to Beloved. To Seth, the future was a matter of keeping the past at bay. The better life, she believed, she and Denver were living, was simply not that other one. Morrison, page 51. This quote was said by Seth while she is enjoying her freedom after escaping Sweet Home. She is starting to feel hopeful for the future, but worries that her past will hold her back. Because Seth had suffered for so many years at the hands of slavery, she worries that she will not be able to fully enjoy her new life. She considers any life other than slavery to be better than the one she had lived before. So in order for Seth to see a future for herself, she must forget about slavery, or at least try to. Third connection to 12 Years a Slave. Let not those who have never been placed in like circumstances judge me harshly. until they have been chained and beaten, until they find themselves in the situation I was, born away from home and a family towards a land of bondage, let them refrain from saying what they would not do for liberty. Northup, page 40. This quote is said by Northup when he is discussing his kidnapping and being forced into the slave trade, despite being born a free man. He is warning others not to judge him for what he did, or in this case, failed to do. He describes the physical elements of slavery, including abuse and loss of one's desire to fight back. Although freedom was always a motivation for him, Northup was too afraid to act on his desires, and instead, he suffered the mistreatment. This proves that slavery is dehumanizing and makes a person lose all aspects of their personality, including their drive to fight for their freedom and even their life. Third connection to beloved. We got more yesterday than anybody. We need some kind of tomorrow. Morrison, page 322. This quote was said by Paul D. to Seth after she is bedridden and he is taking care of her. It is a moment that in order for he and Seth to have a future together, Paul D. realizes and decides that he can no longer let the past haunt him. Slavery not only took a toll on him physically, but also mentally, which is preventing him from forming relationships, especially one that he wants with Seth. Paul D. finally decides to take charge of his life and decides that his quote-unquote tomorrow, aka his future, will be the start of a bright future and a new life for him. Although slavery has hurt him in many ways, he uses this as leverage to begin working on bettering himself and his new life with Seth. Reflection. Both stories display a variety of emotions. However, one thing is certain, they are both devastating in their own ways. These stories show the mistreatment of both parties that they endured at the hands of fellow human beings, which fills many with remorse and even disgust. Although me and my classmates were not a part of this era, obviously, many people still feel the effects of slavery to this day. Whether it be a form of racial division, violence, or even just a snide remark that we make off the cuff, racism is still alive and well to this day, unfortunately. So this presentation was meant to bring awareness of how, even in fiction text, slavery has a horrible impact on people in the past, and even today, we are still feeling the effects of slavery and suffering at the hands of racism, and we need to work on it to make it stop. Thank you for listening.